AI is changing our world dramatically. You know that. And we talk a lot about the commercial and the ways that you can use it for marketing opportunities that are there. But there's a big issue that we need to be aware of also as entrepreneurs, and that is the deep fakes that are out there. In this interview I had with Mike Primo, he's one of the experts in audio and video forensics. He's called by really big time professionals to testify in major cases and talk about this. He's one of the most knowledgeable. We got an inside scoop with him on what you need to know as an entrepreneur. This is one you really want to watch. It's not so much about making more money. That's always a good thing. But this is going to give you some answers on what, first of all, what's going on. Some of it might be a little bit scary, but what to do about it as we discuss this on this episode of Stark Raving Entrepreneurs. The field of AI is changing our world profoundly. We're finding many ways that it's helping us in marketing and business, makes it easier and does a lot of good there. It also has a lot of ramifications in audio and video. There's a lot of positive that can come from taking your voice and being able to clone that and be able to say more that you want. We as creators often will want to do that. Video, to create videos even better and faster. Hey, there's some good with that. But there's also a flip side. And the flip side is there's some dangers and we've got some problems. So what we're doing today is we're going to give you a chance to find out from an expert on what's going on. Joining me right now from his offices in the Detroit area is Mike Primo, who is a forensics expert working with audio and video with Primo Forensics. Mike, good to have you with us today.
It's an honor to be here, Terry. Thank you for having me.
Well, you see a lot that's going on. I know you've been working with this in your company for many years, listening to an audio and go, is that real or is it not? And or that video, what happened there really? And sometimes you work with law enforcement and you're working in trials to make sure, okay, is this real or not? Tell us a little bit about where we are just from the big picture point of view with audio and video detection and use. And when we can go in from a forensics point of view and decide, is this real or not? Where are we today with the technology?
Yeah, that's a good question. So 30,000-foot view is that artificial intelligence models can be used for useful components and investigative means within the legal community, as well as being used as a weapon, to demonstrate things that aren't necessarily the way that they originally occurred. And the major concern from a scientific community perspective, which in the last couple of years I've become more and more involved with a group called SWIGDE, which is the Scientific Working Group on Digital Evidence. They generate standards and best practices for law enforcement in the space of digital forensics. So audio, video, image, as well as digital forensics. So cell phones and computers and that kind of stuff. Is that we need to understand the methodology. We need to understand the intricacies of how the tools work in order for it to be admissible in a court of law, because the legal world is still and has been human-centric. So when you have computer systems that are making determinations for humans, a human needs to be able to testify about those components of what's actually happening underneath the layers. And again, that can be it can be useful and in good intentions and in good ways to be able to do things like video content analytics. So SWIG actually has a standards document. I can actually send you that references some of the ways that law enforcement can actually use artificial intelligence for the good, like scanning video recordings to find a specific suspect or a vehicle, or performing like video redactions. So to automatically find areas within a video recording to mask, as well as audio-wise to protect the identity of victims and protect the integrity of the investigation, things like that. And then we flip to the bad side, which is manipulation, and that's a strong word that we use within the scientific community that has a definition that essentially means open to erroneous interpretation. So making changes that can be misleading to a trier of fact, a judge, and a jury. So with respect to manipulation, we have made significant strides at being able to detect those things with audio, with audio, but in the recent years, it's become more difficult, increasingly difficult, because how well AI is doing to generate voices and things like that. But with video and imagery, much more significant strides, because there's more of it. That's really what it comes down to. There's more surveillance and more video recordings on sites like YouTube and things like that. But we've also seen a surge, and I won't go too far down this road because it's a sensitive topic, with how these affect crimes with children. specifically with images and video, has become an increasing concern within the scientific community. But the tools are doing very well being able to detect those things. With respect to the audio portion, there is a distinct unknown variable that still exists to be able to identify whether or not that's someone's voice. So with voice comparison, it's actually a process that we've backed away from a little bit for the time being until more research and development has been done into these tools from the private sector. So law enforcement still has access to a lot of the tools that were used for voice comparison, but unfortunately, we don't have access to those tools yet. Again, to be able to make identifications, which in our world, an identification is to the exclusion of all others, right? So if you're going to get to 100% certainty on something, it has to be based on a test that you've provided that eliminates all other possibilities. So with voice comparison, yeah.
I was just going to say, it would seem like we could have AI come up with the right criteria to say, yes, we can say this is Bob's voice. We've checked Bob's voice with other legitimate recordings. We're hearing this new recording. Yes, I can say that is Bob, or at least we have a 99.999% chance. Is that correct?
AI definitely could be useful in that regard, yeah, to be able to complete those models, because from a statistical probability perspective, if we get to say that it's 95% more likely than not, or the strength of that opinion is based on a known data set, because that data set is so large, theoretically, yes, AI would be very beneficial to be able to examine those things and go, yeah, I've compared these components that you fed me as the criteria to arrive at an opinion, and this is where we got. Now there's a new pretty useful tool that we've been testing out. It's fairly new from one of our vendors called AMPed, which is a license plate identification tool. So it uses
AMP.
I'm sorry?
Is that AMP, AMP?
AMPED. So in Italy, they refer to it as AMPed, but in the United States, we call it AMPed. But it's the leading image and video analysis tool for forensic use that they've recently come up with something called Deepfakes, which uses an artificial intelligence algorithm to examine pictures that we give it to arrive at a statistical probability of what it thinks the characters are, those numbers and letters, which is a handy little tool that law enforcement's been using more. So it is something that we have our hands around as a scientific community, but we're a little slower to the uptake with how advanced AI has become in the last couple of years with respect to audio.
Yeah, in one hand, that concerns me because I think, hey, this is something that's moving fast. You know far better than I do how fast it is moving. We see it from the marketing and the commerce side, how fast it is moving. Literally every day, there's something new that happens in the AI space. And I've always been concerned. I've often thought, and in courses that I teach, I've said something, I want to get your professional opinion on this. I said one of the best things we can do is not stop AI, because we could say, let's pass a law and not do anything. We're going to have a really hard time persuading the Russians and the Chinese and the Venezuelans and the North Koreans and the Iranians to stop all their AI activity. And I don't think we're going to be doing the right thing if we just hold it. But I think what we need to do is to put the right guardrails in and then let AI check AI to make sure that it is being correct. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, it's absolutely accurate with respect to the legal community, which is where I live, most of the time. I know that you've done a lot more of that research and testing on the marketing and the technical side. And there's just so much that we're talking about, just the analysis of material, but there's a lot of document, the copy generation that AI is using. But I also read an interesting study to that point yesterday about how two major companies, I don't remember which ones, are fighting over litigation about how their artificial intelligence model used the other company's content to develop itself. So they're saying, hey, you owe us for using all of our blogs and all of our content on our websites to generate your AI model that's now doing X, Y, and Z. So it's interesting to see how it's getting into that litigation component where they're actually trying to set up those guardrails to say even how the AI learns needs to be policed in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, absolutely, there has to be something that says, whatever the tool is doing, this is the means. In the expert testimony courses that we take, it's called staying in your lane. So we know as an expert, we don't try to, me as a video analyst, I'm not going to testify about an accident as an accident reconstructionist. I'm not trained to do that. That's not my qualifications. But if there's a dash cam involved, that's where my expertise, applies to that legal scenario. So yeah, similar concept. There needs to be boundaries. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that's something that we're all concerned about. We say, okay, it could be fake or not. Matter of fact, we're familiar with this. I'm sure you're familiar with the story of a mother and father who got a call from the voice that sounded like their daughter saying,
Mhm.
I've been kidnapped. They need X number of large money. Please send it right now. What are we going to do?
Yep.
And they were very concerned because it sounded like her. This is her mother and father listening and said, yes, this is our daughter. And
Yeah.
she needs this. She's been kidnapped. And then something happened. I forget what it was, but they found out she was actually in her bedroom or something, but there was bad guys doing this. So they didn't send the money and they got out okay. But that kind of scenario seems like it has happened. I'm sure there's many other cases where it has. What can we do to understand how to react to this? And outside of being scared to death, what would you recommend as an
It's pretty
expert?
scary. Yeah, no, as an investigator, I would say that that's a perfect example of how to actually authenticate that scenario, right? So with respect to analysis of the media for authenticity purposes, we have authentication best practices that we examine source structural information that says, hey, does that file look like it came from the way that we, allegedly it had come from? So with respect to videos, something surfaces on YouTube, we obviously know that its source came from some sort of camera. So we have to, be able to see if that source information is contained within that file or traces that camera technology left behind when it was creating that stream. For calls, that can be increasingly difficult because call routing can be done. We don't know exactly where that call is coming from, in which case law enforcement may be limited in their efforts to be able to, respond to that in an appropriate manner. So it's a great question, but a very thorough investigation of, well, let's examine her phone. Let's figure out is her last known location according to the cloud showing something that's reliable and those kinds of things. So because of the abundance of information that are contained in phones, those can be very useful if we have access to the phone or access to the cloud. What we're seeing a lot more of now we have a partner company in Troy that we work with here locally that collects and does our cell phone and computer forensic analysis that we work closely with. A lot of cases that we're examining where we're collecting the devices, they're actually saying, hey, this isn't good enough. We need to go to the cloud. And it's a godsend in a lot of cases that we have that cloud information that we can extract for that user because there's more hiding there than there is in the actual device in a lot of situations.
Yeah.
So that becomes increasingly useful to go to those sources. So although, in litigation where we're talking about, let's say, a criminal case and we need to analyze an audio recording, or a civil case that's got hundreds of millions of dollars at stake because of robocalling or something to that effect, authentication best practices really kick in to see if we can determine, does this look like something that came from that type of device, or does it look like something that uses some sort of software to create that file?
Yep, I think that'll make the difference. Well, let me hit you with something that I've concocted on my own. I often talk about in classes and in courses where I'm speaking, and sometimes people are a little bit concerned. Let's suppose, for instance, Mike, you are now president of the United States.
Oh
Wonderful guy
boy.
like that you are. We made you president
Okay.
of the United States. You're in
Yeah.
your Oval Office. You're working on some matters, deep thought on that. Suddenly, the door bursts open. In walks about 5 to 10 of your closest, most trusted aides. They're saying, Mr. President, turn on your phone right now. Putin is on there saying he's about ready to launch missiles against the United States. It looks like him. It sounds like him.
Yeah.
What do we do, Mr. President? You know that within 15 minutes, if he really does launch those missiles against, let's say, New York, LA, oh, and Detroit, just because you're from Detroit, and he's going
Sure.
to take,
Yeah.
in 15 minutes, it could be over. Or if it's not him and you launch first to take out Moscow, St. Petersburg, or whatever else, then you've been the one that initiated it and they're going to see the missiles coming. What do you do in that case, Mr. President, when you get that report?
That is a complex, yeah, that's a unique situation.
And unfortunately, today, that's not just hypothetical. I would
Right.
have said 10 years ago, yeah, but that's probably not going to
Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
Today, oops, when we have Putin saying we're not scared of using nuclear weapons, we could
Yeah.
do this if you push us too far. And
Yeah.
so I know it's scary, but I think we need to kind of go there, at least examine a little bit and think about it. What are your thoughts on that?
So the first thing that comes to mind is, I apply it to law enforcement. I'm not a law enforcement officer, but I train with and work closely with law enforcement these days with respect to forensics because they are kind of on the bleeding edge of that because of how much they have to deal with a lot of the multimedia that's presented as evidence. And one of the things I really like is companies like Ring have a portal specifically for law enforcement. So if they have an issue where, let's say they're canvassing a neighborhood for a homicide that occurred, and they notice there's 10 rings throughout that street, they can then go to the Ring portal through order of a search warrant that's signed by a judge to collect all of that data from their server. So it's like a cooperation that Ring has with law enforcement specifically. I feel like there would have to be some sort of cooperation that the presidential office has with the resources that they're collecting that from. Let's say they found it on YouTube. It would be ideal in a perfect world that, I would have the ability to contact Google and say, hey, we have a relationship. I need to see that file and send it to my advisors so they can figure out if it looks like something that Putin actually said or not. And we
Yeah,
need to do
and this
that real
could be
quick.
real time. It could
Yeah.
be we're seeing it live. It's a YouTube live
And
going
if
out.
it's yeah, and if it's a live stream, yeah, definitely. Then YouTube, if there's something that they can offer with respect to where those servers are communicating that information, and cybersecurity professionals were involved to help kind of understand and verify those things. I think it really comes down to the cooperation that
Mhm.
you have with these resources. So take AI for example. Having these communications with companies that own these tools and saying, hey, we have a serious concern here for what's going on. We need kind of a back door from a government or law enforcement perspective to make sure that we can act accordingly in the timelines that we need to act to investigate.
Yep, and it would seem like that. And cooperation, I would say, also would need to be between the various governments to say, hey, wait a minute. I know that,
That's
for
yeah,
instance, they have,
yeah,
I think it's a red phone. I've not been there. I don't know. But a way
yeah,
that the president of the United States could pick up the phone, get directly through to the leader of Russia or China or wherever and say, hey, what's going on? Is this real or not? Let us know and use the code that we know have to be. It
exactly.
seems like they would have some kind of protocols that they would go through on both sides because really, I don't think any sane person on the planet wants to destroy all life on the planet.
Definitely. Yeah. And that's a really good point to verify, like, hey, we got this video that's saying it's you. We're concerned it might be A, B, C, or D country that's, trying to spark something between us. And, before we both spend our time and resources on this, we just want to verify it. And there should be
Yep.
that cooperation. Definitely. There should.
Yeah, I remember a few years ago, several years ago, I had the opportunity of, I was over in Moscow. I speak a very little Russian. I think I
Yeah.
studied some of that in undergrad school and had a chance to meet some people, got a chance to know them. They invited me over for a very big dinner in their home, just the family. And it was interesting. There was a knock at the door. And I wonder who that is. After we were there about 10, 15 minutes or so, in walked a gentleman. They were speaking in Russian to each other. He came over to me and he said in perfect English, American accent, you must be Terry. I'm like, what is this? Oh, what's going on?
Huh.
And he introduced himself as the man's brother who was here. Come to find out, he was a KGB general. And
Oh,
we're
wow.
coming in. We had a chance to get to know each other, and I thought this is really interesting, talking to each other. But the reason I mentioned this is he was talking about when they were at the Cuban Missile Crisis. He happened to be right in Washington at the Soviet embassy during that time. And when he told me, I said, "Well, God, I'm concerned because for us that was a big deal thing. What was it that caused it to stop? What stopped it?" He said, "Well, it was when your president sent his brother to our embassy." I said, "What? I've never heard that. What do you mean?" "Yes, when he sent Bobby Kennedy to the Soviet embassy, that means he was on Soviet soil. We could have done whatever." And they told Khrushchev, who was the premier at that time, the Americans really don't want to do it. They're going to do this and this. And come to find out, that actually was classified information, and eventually it was declassified. That
Okay.
Soviet KGB general was telling me the truth. And so I say
Wow.
that to say we've had the communication back and forth. During that Cuban Missile Crisis, we could have gone into nuclear war. But fortunately, they realized, okay, we need to have this communication. We need to stay in touch. So it sounds to me like we've got some good opportunities, and what you're saying really
Yeah.
is good. I got one other thing I want to share with you and with our viewers and our listeners right now, something that I think you'll find interesting. Earlier today, I was doing some fiddling around with Perplexity and with Claude. Perplexity is a tool that's great. I just yesterday went into the paid version on that, and I want to show you a little scenario that I've got.
Okay.
Okay, I'm looking at a prompt that I put in here just a little while ago. And Mike, here's the prompt that I put in. Now, this is going to Claude 3, which by many are saying it's ahead of ChatGPT. It's ahead of Perplexity. Really, really good, really accurate. And I said, is this picture of two human beings or is it AI generated? How can you tell either way? Should have put a question mark there. What are the traits and signals that let you know what this picture really is? And so I'm going to click on this
Okay.
right here. And is that picture coming through for you, Mike?
Yeah, I can see
Yeah.
it.
If I told you that's Mike Brown and that's Sally Smith, they live in Warren, Michigan, not too far from you there in the Detroit area, and they want to meet with you next Thursday at 3. That's what they look like. That would seem like those are real people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
seems like it. So here I'm asking the service. I say, okay, hey Claude 3, tell me what do you think? Well, here's the answer that it gave me. It said the image appears to detect two real human beings, not an AI generated image. There are several traits and signals that suggest it is a photograph of actual people. And so it went on here and said, oh, the level of detail and realism and the facial features, clothing textures, and background environment is extremely high, naturalistic. The lighting structures and shadows and reflections of the people's faces and clothing look physically accurate. The body language and no obvious artifact. In other words, plenty of reason to say, yeah, these are real people. And Mike, you can go meet them next Thursday in Warren, Michigan, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I came back and I said, well, this is actually AI generated and is not real human beings. If you know it is not real human beings now, what could have led you to believe inaccurately that it is a picture of two real humans? I thought this is where we're getting into the nitty gritty. And this is where Claude 3 comes in, because it goes another step, several steps beyond what we're seeing in other tools. It said, you're correct. Upon further investigation and your clarification that this is an AI generated image rather than a photograph of real people, I can now identify certain subtle traits that could have misled my initial assessment. Number one, the facial features, while highly detailed, have a slightly smoothed or idealized quality that is sometimes seen in AI-generated faces. Okay, that's good to know. And it's kind of like, okay, it's feeding this information, it can learn it. The lighting and shadows, though realistic overall, have a somewhat flat or unevenly or evenly distributed quality across the scene that can be a hallmark of AI image generation. And it goes on for some others. And my thought is, okay, the information that it got the second time from my question seems like we need to get to that level first, build that in there so that when the next time we say, is this the real person? Or in my hypothetical scenario, we hope never happens, is this really Putin saying, I'm going to drop, immediately bomb, that it can go in and can say, wait a minute, this is not Vladimir Putin because the voice is different or the facial context is a little different or lighting is different or something like that. It would seem like that would be some of the ways that we can build in a little more safety, but you're the expert on this. What are your thoughts on that?
So in order for something to be courtroom admissible, we have to be able to ensure that it's based on a novel forensic science. So, what is the methodology that that person is going to be talking about? And it was actually interesting timing. I received a ruling for a Fry hearing that was done on another case yesterday, where an AI enhancement tool was used by a video professional. They claimed to be a forensics video professional, but it was later ruled that they were more like a videographer as opposed to someone that's forensically qualified and trained, that was using a specific tool that was an AI enhancement methodology. And the court ruled that it was inadmissible and it can't be used, the exhibits that they were offering and things like that, because at its core, we can't account that what it's doing was accurately being done. So we can enhance something, we can make it bigger, we can make it prettier. That doesn't necessarily mean that the process that was, let's say, enlarging that picture was accurately taking those pixels and introducing those things into the recording in an accurate, reliable way. So with respect to like authentication, for example, in that model, the chatbot doesn't really say what it's doing. It's just saying it's visually looking at the photograph. But there are specific tests that are considered best practices to examine and go, yes, we've examined this thing and this is the result. So it almost looks like it's also doing it on a global level without an understanding of the technology. So a big component of the forensic process is to understand how that technology works. So when you're producing something like a JPEG picture, that JPEG algorithm, the way that it's creating all of those pixels and packaging that file, has certain clues it leaves behind to be able to verify that it's working the way that, in an authentic manner when it's capturing that photograph, as opposed to if it's being used to do something in Photoshop. And I'm not saying that Photoshop is a bad tool to use and it's only used for bad ways. We use it in forensics as well, within the appropriate means, considered best practices. So for starters, we would have to know exactly what those algorithms from the chatbot are doing. What is it examining? Is it just looking through the picture and saying, yeah, this looks like people, but is it comparing that with a known database of people? Or is it just assuming based on what you fed it that those are people? And then it goes back and looks at it again and goes, oh yeah, I see what you're saying, Terry. That makes sense. So it doesn't appear to be very thorough as opposed to, understanding, hey, these are the tests I ran, Terry. These are the results. You make the decision.
Yep, exactly. And we can build a lot of that in there. Well, Mike, you have helped us a lot today. You scared us a little bit too, but that's all right. Sometimes we need that to realize the reality.
Yeah, well, I hope it was a good kind of scared, and I appreciate the opportunity to share with you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And if someone says, hey, we want to find out about that, or we might need some forensics work, how would someone get in touch with you? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so we've got contact forms on our website, primoforensics.com.
And please spell that for those that might not speak English as their native language. How do you spell that? Real slowly.
P as in Paul, R as in Robert, I as in Indigo, M as in Mary, E as in Edward, A as in Alpha, U as in underscore, forensics, FORENSICS.com. Yeah, you can get in touch with us via phone, email. And then a great resource to learn more about the best practices within digital forensics is SWGDE. That's SWGDE.org. It's a great resource for information.
Excellent. Well, Mike, you've helped us a lot in this area. Very, very important, and we appreciate you being with us. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Terry.
Well, that was quite an interview. Thanks to Mike Primo for helping us out on that and give us some good ideas. Think about how you need to approach the world as an entrepreneur and these deep fakes. This is going to be important. Matter of fact, we've got something for you, another video that's going to help you in learning about AI and how you can use these. And we'll look forward to hearing from you. Please leave a comment below. Let us know what you think of this, how you're approaching it, and what you think. I'm Terry Brock for Stark Raving Entrepreneurs. Thank you very much for being with us.